In the 60s, Stanley Milgram did a very famous experiment where they wanted to test the role of authority figures in getting someone to do, or a group of people to do, something they might not otherwise do. If you haven't seen the clip of this, it's pretty moving. But what's interesting is that they had hypothesized that people would stand up. That is to say, if someone off the street was being asked to do something that they did not agree with, that they would say, "Hey, listen, I'm sorry, I'm just not comfortable with it." They refuse to. They get up and leave. Basically, they would not comply. They would not follow the authority figure. And what was disturbing about all of this is that the experiment proved that it was anything but. So for those of you not familiar with the experiment, participants were instructed to administer electric shocks to a learner. Now, the learner was actually an actor, but this was not known to the person who was administering the shocks. Anyways, whenever the learner gave an incorrect answer to a question, the shocks were then administered by the person they were actually doing the study on. And the shocks were administered on this machine, which went from mild all the way up to deadly. The machine actually said lethal and then XXX. You can check out the videos to actually see what's going on. And the real point of this was the study was trying to figure out what was the willingness of the participants, that is the people who were giving the shocks, what was the willingness of them to go against their moral conscience, because this was all going in. The actor, the person who was the learner, who did the same thing every single time, was set up so that at very scripted stages along the process, to remove as many variables as possible, he would either complain, he would always complain, he would always say he had a heart condition, and then towards the end, he basically just stopped responding. This would, from the perspective of the person who was giving the shocks, the teacher, appear that either he was in significant pain, you would hear the guy scream too. it's kind of disturbing to watch, and then just stop responding. And the reason that this might be cause to suggest death was, again, the guy said, "I've got a weak heart condition, it's the electrical, whatever would be bad for me." But anyways, Josh, you've got the stats on where this all went.
Yeah, 65% of the participants actually went all the way to the end, to where the guy actually died. And if you watch the experiment, the people and the administrators were saying "Hey, are you sure we could keep going?" And most people wanted to stop. But the real key figure is that when the evil guy in the lab coat would say, "No, just keep going. Don't worry. All responsibility is on us. Just do it."
Every single must continue.
Yeah, and the people would just continuously shock the person, quite literally, to death.
Not everyone. Not everyone. A few would actually refuse to do it. A few would actually refuse to do it.
It was 65% of people that did it to death, which is just astonishing, because you think about it. How is it that all these people commit these atrocities across the world? This was cited a lot during the Hitler invasion. How is it possible that so many people can do such bad things? Or during the cerveza sickness with what was just happening? How are people forcefully mandating these horrible things that nobody would really justify you should be forcefully doing to anyone? But it happens. And when the authority leader tells you to do something, most people just bend down like a wet dog.
Yeah, I think kind of the way I would say it is that we have a bad tendency, we have a blind spot of humans to kind of outsource thinking. And we do this by the creation of heuristics. And there's nothing wrong with a heuristic. And my favorite go-to is, we all stop at red lights, we go at green lights, okay? There's just way too much data out there to do an in-depth analysis on absolutely everything. So by all means, you need heuristics. But the catch is that heuristics, even though they're necessary, they're insufficient. So you get into this really weird blind spot where, when people forget, and this is my personal argument here, but when people forget a heuristic is a heuristic and they're asking it to do more than it can, you run into problems. And so this is just my personal philosophy and kind of where I start, is I think heuristics, what the general consensus is probably a good place to start, but it might not be the best place to end. It might be the place to end, but it might not. And so again, I think whenever you're looking at a decision, you kind of start with, the wisdom of crowds, what is kind of everyone else thinking? And then you continue to look at it from your own perspective, does this or does this not make sense? Does this pass the smell test? I had an old boss that always said that, and he was very, very accurate on that. And I think, going back to, and this is the reason we're doing this video, is in the context of kind of where we are right now with a certain medical therapy, which doesn't seem to be all that was advertised, particularly safe and effective. So I think in the context of certain medical therapy, you have a very similar situation that was set up. Now, whether or not it was intentional, I don't know. I've got suspicions, but let's just say I do not know one way or the other. But the key thing is that it's just like, the doctor in the lab coat, from the Milgram experiment, whether it was, your personal doctor, whether it was the government, whether it was the scientists, whatever, right? It struck me as very much shades the same. kind of like, you must continue, the experiment must continue, don't worry, or whatever, right? And it took, I think, quite a while. I mean, if there was ever going to be a great filter that the species was going to go through, at least, like for mentally, like who can actually think for themselves, to be able to like stand up and I would argue give a rebuke to what I call the consensus monster in this particular situation. I mean, that took quite a lot, because it wasn't just so much like not being able to like, get on a plane and like travel. It's like, listen, you go over to see, the family for Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, like, you might lose your job, or at least be, or at least potentially materially impact your ability to make a livelihood. And so that was quite a lot of social pressure that was brought down to bear. And for those who were able to evade and escape it and resist it, most importantly, that's impressive. And it goes back to, the Milgram experiment, right? Are you willing to rebuke the authority figure solely on the merits of what you believe to be true or not true?
Just like the Milgram experiment, afterwards, people regretted what they did greatly. And a lot of people, you see it today, are starting to regret the decisions they made or chose not to make.
Yeah. And for all those that do regret, their maybe the most recent medical decisions, Josh, we'll go ahead and have the editors put up a link. You can go to, I think, www.pfizer/refunds if you would like to request a refund for anything that might have been done. Moderna has the same address. Good luck.